Each and every day, enjoy the Simple Six menu at Subway, an entire made-for-you meal featuring one of six-inch sandwiches like the Italian BMT or Black Forest ham, with any bag of chips and a 21-ounce drink, all for only $6. Subway. Eat fresh.
The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects. The BS Report. The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report, taping this on a Thursday afternoon, running this on Friday, heading into the weekend. 8 episodes of Breaking Bad left. Our guest, Chuck Klosterman, from a longtime Grantland contributor / contributing editor / consultant / other titles. He wrote a piece, I think, in the first 2 months of after we launched, making the case that Breaking Bad was the best television show ever. Do you still feel that way, Chuck Klosterman?
Well, that's a difficult question. I guess we will see over these next 8 episodes. Oddly, the reason I'm so apprehensive to say yes is because I feel in some ways Mad Men may have sort of moved into the lead again. It's interesting. These shows don't run at the same time, so it always seems like the whatever one you've just watched seems richer and sort of more complicated. So because I've just seen that season of Mad Men, I'm like, boy, I wonder if Breaking Bad is going to be as meaningful as this. But now I did see the first episode of this new season, and now I'm starting to, lean back the other way. So I guess it means my opinions aren't very meaningful. Well,
maybe it's almost like talking about music, where we've had enough really, really good TV dramas that it just matters that you made the list.
Well, they're still happening. It would be it would be sort of like using a sports comparison, it was sort of like now it's very clear that LeBron is better than Durant and better than Carmelo Anthony. Although I feel like there was a time in the past where people would sometimes debate this like it was a real thing, and now no one has that conversation anymore.
Yeah, or even whether LeBron was going to get to that, top 12 or top 15 of all time. You would have said after the 2011 finals that it was more likely that he didn't get there, and then and things switched for him. In truth, we should probably wait 20 years before we make this decision. Because it's like, we often in these conversations we talk about the same 4 or 5 shows, all sort of conceding that one of these shows is the best of all time. But we have to see 20 years from now if any of them are still part of the conversation. That will be interesting. Yeah, and sometimes TV shows just don't hold up, I feel like Cheers was one of the 3 or 4 best comedies ever, but if you watch it now, it feels pretty dated. The clothes are dated and everything about it's dated.
It does and it doesn't. A few months ago, a guy named Brian Raftery did an oral history of Cheers.
I read it.
That?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know Brian. He's a good friend of mine. And before, or maybe right after I read it, or maybe during the process of doing it, I went back and I watched the first season of Cheers. And not only did the jokes to some degree hold up, I thought, but it was more formally inventive than I recall. But there's some really weird camera shots from the first season in particular. The way they show the bar, there's one episode that ends with this long dolly shot moving from the back room to the front door. It was actually a little more interesting than I guess I remembered it. So sometimes these shows, even if they kind of fall out of the conversation, when you go back and watch them, you sort of don't realize that there were things to them besides the characters. Because ultimately, when we talk about MASH, or we talk about, the Andy Griffith Show or Barney Miller or any of these things, inevitably we just start talking about the characters. We don't even talk about the plot. We only talk about the people. And that's really only an aspect of what makes the show great. Certainly with Breaking Bad, we really talk about the main character and we talk about Jesse Pinkman. But if you're going to make the serious argument that it's the best show of all time, part of it has to do with the cinematography, because that is more advanced than the other shows in the peer group.
All right, we're going to get to that in a second. I want to follow up on the Cheers thing, because I probably didn't say that right, because for me, the show still holds up. but I feel like for America, it doesn't because, I mean, just look at like Seinfeld and Friends have managed to stay on like the relevant syndication channels, right? Whereas Cheers is always on like some weird cable channel at odd times that, you know, are like the channels where they also show like Hogan's Heroes and shows like that. So it feels it didn't have the legs that, say, Seinfeld has. Seinfeld is still on at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on mainstream channels.
Yeah, and like Friends is going to fade from that position. Friends will still not be as heavily syndicated in 10 years. Seinfeld may. Because
I don't know if you're right about Friends because I think it's found a whole new audience for people that missed it the first time. I've talked to David Cho about this, our Grantland publisher. He loves Friends, but he missed it like the first time around.
I'm not saying that Friends is going to be perceived as this disaster. I'm just saying that it's too much of a conventional sitcom. Part of the reason Seinfeld stays kind of with its position of relevance is because it was sort of the first fully self-aware sitcom, and it was the idea of plotlessness and all of these things were like these new ideas that had never been in a mainstream show like that. So people will always Seinfeld will age better than other programs solely because it's not really dependent on anything going on in the culture at the time, whereas Friends kind of was. I mean, like one of the key episodes of Friends is they're going to a Hootie and the Blowfish concert. That will seem very kind of charming, but very weird in the distant future.
Yeah, Seinfeld's almost like Law and Order, where all episodes are kind of like their own thing, and it doesn't matter if you've seen any other episode. The thing with the Friends, we were actually talking about that episode in the Grantland office. There's another one, I think like 2 years later, where Chandler and Joey are afraid to leave their room because there's scrambled porn. They can't change the channel in the apartment because the scrambled porn unscrambled. They don't want to mess it up. And that seems like that came out like 2 million years ago. But I was watching, ironically, when I was traveling for the NBA Finals, I finished Breaking Bad. And I was really sick for like 3-4 days for the last 2 games of the finals. And I was just like,
I know that was terrible timing for you. That was the worst possible time for you to get sick. That often seems to happen to you.
I know.
You get sick at inopportune time.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it was like I'd pitched a no-hitter of sickness the whole season. And then for somehow game 6, which was like one of the 6 greatest games of all time, that was the most sick I've been in 5 years. And I was on live television, which you can't do anything. It's not like you can call in sick. So you just kind of have to deal with it.
Do you think that it's you know, because you're so good at affording, you know, keeping away your fears and apprehensions and nervousness, that your unconscious takes over and makes you sick in periods of high stress?
I like that concept, but no, the more airplanes you put me on, the odds just go through the roof. I'm going to get sick. It was the same thing for any book tour. But I was in my hotel room for 2 days, just like lying in bed being sick, and I had nothing to watch because Breaking Bad was done, and I didn't have the brain cells to commit to like Justified or Scandal or learning any new show. And I started watching the Cheers from season 1 and season 2. And you're right. The way it was structured was totally original compared to what we see from sitcoms now, and the snappiness, and you know they would go 2-3 minutes without like a real joke or just to set up one joke. And I thought that was really interesting. I actually liked how the oral history captured that. Like they made a point of saying they weren't trying to make a sitcom. They were trying to make a television show about people. And it makes you wonder why people haven't tried to emulate that. But back to Breaking Bad for a second. I binge watched it, which, you know, I probably watched the entire everything up until where we're picking up this weekend. I watched, I would say in 4 or 5 weeks. And when I'm not positive the show is meant to be watched that way because Walter White goes evil so much faster when you're watching. By the way, we're going to spoil this entire show. So if you've never watched Breaking Bad, I would stop listening now. Walter White goes evil so quickly when you're binge watching it, but you watched it as the shows were just coming on, right? What was the experience like to watch Walter White deteriorate, you know, over the course of 4 years?
Well, that's a good point, because after like when James Gandolfini died, people went back. Like I was one of these people who went back and started rewatching episodes of The Sopranos. And when you get to the end of The Sopranos, during that last season, it becomes very clear, like they're very overt about this, that like this is a sociopath. This person is essentially mentally ill. He has no moral compass and all of these things. And when you go back and watch the old episodes of The Sopranos, that becomes very clear in everything he does. But while you were watching it in real time, he just seemed complicated. So when you're watching Breaking Bad, with weeks at a time in between, it didn't seem fast to me. It felt like it happened slowly. But, if you binge watch a show, everything happens fast. Not just the evolution of characters, but the whole story. I mean, like the story, like Breaking Bad's narrative arc for the first 2 seasons did seem slow. In fact, I feel like I recall that being a criticism, that not enough is happening in that show. That criticism doesn't really exist when you binge watch something.
Yeah, the first season did feel a tiny bit slow, but I also watched 6 episodes in 2 days, so things tend to go a lot faster. I'm not sure that's how a show like that is meant to be watched, but on the other hand, it's the greatest possible show to binge watch, right? Because the whole point of a binge watch is it's 1:30 in the morning and you just told yourself that this was the last episode and you're not watching another one, but then the show ends and you're like, oh God, I got to keep going. And now all of a sudden it's 2:30 in the morning and you're wrapping up the next one. And I think Breaking Bad was, the perfect show to just get sucked in late at night like that.
I feel like binge watching makes the experience with a program actually much closer to what the showrunner intends. Like with a show like Breaking Bad, it's maybe its greatest strength outside of kind of the acting and the core idea of this person becoming bad or whatever, is that every detail of the show is unwasted. I mean, they're very much of the thinking that like if you have a character refer to something or say something in an episode, it must have a purpose. It must come back later. And if you watch it in real time, sometimes you'll almost forget those things. And then if you read a recap or if someone mentions it, you'll be like, oh, yeah, that's why he had that plant or whatever there. But when you binge watch it, you don't forget any of that stuff. It's like watching a movie. So it actually, you're as immersed as the person making the show. I'm sure if you like Vince Gilligan, I bet he loves when people binge watch the show because they actually pick up all the things he's trying to jam into it. There's no chance that they're going to forget that it was there.
Do you think that because of this whole recap culture we're in now, that people sometimes read too much into stuff, that nobody could possibly be that talented to put all of the things that we think they're putting into these episodes?
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, like Doc Jensen from EW kind of invented that, right? The idea that the person recapping the show could be smarter than the person making the show when he was doing the Lost recap.
Yeah.
Now there's more of that in general. I mean, it's recapping now. It really needs to be renamed because that's not what it is. Initially, recapping, like when Television Without Pity first started like recapping stuff, it was almost if you missed the show, or if it was for people who want to know about a show that they don't actually watch for whatever reason because their friends talk about it. Now the good recaps don't really do any recapping, and if they do, your eyes skip right over it. I mean, the whole idea now of recapping is to read in further than necessary and to sort of have a second experience. So if somebody loves Breaking Bad, they can watch it on Sunday and read about it on Monday, and they're kind of connected, but not really.
So there are almost more interpretations. I remember in the mid-'90s, my friend Scooter, who was a girl who I went to college with, used to send out recaps of 90210 and Melrose Place to just email to her friends. And they were great. And they were legitimate recaps like what you're describing. Now it's almost like English majors trying to interpret what a book meant has where it's gone. So I don't even know if you'd call it recaps. It's become something else. What's interesting to me is or one of the many things that's interesting to me is think about like how music critics, when they write about something, it's naturally like confrontational, and the music, they get mad at each other and they're always like taking shots, and it's kind of like the Wild Wild West. The TV recap world, everybody's like buddy. There's no feuds in the TV recap world. Have you noticed that?
Well, there isn't, because they've just all collectively agreed these are the shows we think are great, in a way that has not happened in any other art form that I can think of the last 40 years.
Well, why is that?
There's some consensus in rock criticism. There were some artists that were like, critical darlings, and obviously certain films are kind of appreciated by everybody, but not the way it is in television. In television, it's not competitive at all. It's cooperative. Like they often mention other recappers in their own recaps. It's almost like that they're working together to put together like the book on Mad Men or the book on Breaking Bad in real time.
Right. And the same thing, they're also super cooperative with the showrunners, which is another thing I don't get. Like the showrunners, it seems like the smarter ones try to establish relationship with all the recappers, because then they feel bad if they're criticizing anything. That's why if I had a show, I would reach out to all the people that recap stuff. Hey, what can I give you? Can I give you a little bit behind the scenes, whatever? Because that's like the smart move. Then they're writing about you almost like it's like their buddy that made whatever show. It's really weird to me, the consensus. Like I thought Emily Nussbaum's piece about Sex and the City a couple weeks ago, which was just great. I just loved it. And part of the angle was that she was really disagreeing with Brett Martin's book, which I also really liked, about how TV has changed over the last 15 years. And her thesis was that he really, really discounted Sex and the City in a way that she just totally disagreed with. And I actually think she was right. Sex and the City, like, you can't point to The Sopranos and the impact that it had on HBO and Oz to a lesser extent, but not also talk about Sex and the City, which was like the first cable comedy that really pushed boundaries.
Although,
I like that piece.
As is so often the case, though, the complaint invalidates the thesis. It's not that people are discounting Sex and the City. It's in the New Yorker. There's a long piece years after this, frankly, not very good show was on, that someone is sort of saying it still has a lot of cultural import. Granted, it's not in the guy's book. The guy's writing about drama. The guy's writing about specific things. Why would he need to write about this show for any reason beyond satiating this feeling that this show doesn't get enough respect when it clearly does? I mean, Emily Nussbaum's the top of this pyramid. Like the New Yorker television coverage is the top of the television coverage. So I see this all the time. I see people complaining that things are not getting enough attention or that things are underrated. But the argument they're making proves that that's not the case. There are people in positions of power who like things and say that this thing should get more coverage, but that process proves that it is being recognized.
But that complaining was pretty rare for that whole TV world. That was why I brought it up, right?
Well, I mean,
we were just talking about how there's a consensus in thought, and that was one of the few times I remember somebody actually disagreeing with another TV writer.
Well, her disagreement was that the book should have recognized this, and that Carrie Bradshaw was like, kind of this progenitor of the anti-hero for women in television. It's not a terrible argument. I mean, it's totally reasonable to like Sex and the City, but the shows that he's talking about in that book are not similar to Sex and the City. It would be no different if he would have added, Ari from Entourage or something in the book. Right. Like it wouldn't have made. They're not the same.
I think her point was that she was talking about how HBO is pushing boundaries, and if you're going to talk about the boundaries, then you have to bring up that boundary, which I don't know. I respect the point. I thought it was interesting that Brett Martin and Alan Sepinwall, who basically wrote two books concurrently, Sepinwall's came out first, but it was pretty much about the same theme, and yet they totally got along. I think I would have been the opposite. I would have wanted to destroy the other guy. These guys were like buddy-buddy about it. But that goes back to your point, like that whole TV world is very all-inclusive and everybody's looking out for each other. It'd be interesting to see somebody, if this were wrestling, you'd almost have somebody form the personality, right, of the person who goes after all the other recappers as they're doing theirs. I'm surprised that hasn't happened yet.
It also, part of that might be because the kind of person who reads one recap about Breaking Bad tends to read them all. Like it's not a competitive thing so much, you know.
All right.
Like you say, like Stiffenwall and the guy who wrote the book, Brett Martin, or was it Brett Martin? Is that his name?
Brett Martin, yeah.
Yeah. Like the type of person who reads one of those books is very likely to read the other. I mean, it's just that they're the kind of person who's sort of like, I don't just watch TV because I like to look at something for 3 hours. I like to think about it. I want books about this. You know, I want as many as I can find.
Yeah. And you read those books, right? Did you read them?
I read one. I read
I read both. I like both, and I actually thought they were written differently and kind of complemented each other. But Breaking Bad, which I had been saving like a fine wine, and just waiting and waiting for the right moment. And then with the season finale coming up, I wanted to catch up, and it's great. And, you know, one of the things that really bothered me was during the Mad Men era was I just couldn't believe John Hamm didn't win an Emmy. And I just thought his Don Draper performance was really understated and just complicated, and just at some point he should have been recognized. Then you watch Breaking Bad and you're like, oh my God, Cranston's unbelievable in this. And that was my, you know, we're going to talk about different takeaways from the show, but my number one takeaway just from watching the show is it's one of the most incredible acting performances I've ever seen on television. I mean, I think it's up there with Gandolfini, and I don't even know what else. Those are would be the two that jump out. Would you agree with that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, he's a great actor. I think that pretty much all the performances on Breaking Bad across the board are pretty good. If somebody said, I know there's people who hate the Skyler character, but they really dislike that character. It would be hard to argue that she's doing a bad job with that role. The Emmys are something I don't really follow. The thing is that John Hamm has never won one for his performance. Is that accurate?
Yeah, the one time he was going to win was the year Cranston wasn't in it because they didn't have a Breaking Bad episode during the time frame. But then Kyle Chandler won for Friday Night Lights, and everybody who loves Mad Men also probably likes Friday Night Lights, so nobody got mad about that.
I watched your podcast with John Hamm, though. I don't think he cares.
He definitely doesn't.
He seems like he has a pretty good perception of like why his life is awesome.
It's the William Goldman theory of when people become famous after a certain age, they're good to go. Like if it happens to
part of it, yeah.
If it happens to you after 30, you're fine. You handle everything right. If you're Justin Bieber, it's a little more worrisome.
So I saw you in that podcast. You and John Hamm are in a fantasy football league together. When did he join this league? Was that after Mad Men or pre-Mad Men?
It was probably like right around somewhere between the first and second season. He was friends with one of the guys, really good friends with one of the guys in the draft, and needed a league, and it's kind of hung out at the Jimmy house every once in a while for football. So it was.
I was just wondering if you would have joined beforehand, if you would have been in a situation where you'd been like sitting around at a draft and he's like, yeah, I'm going to be on this show. It's about the 60s and I'm going to be an advertising guy.
No, but you know what, though? That did happen. Like he had come to football and it was like, yeah, this is some actor. He's in Providence. You know, I'm like, oh, I'd never seen that show. Like, so he had come over, and then all of a sudden Mad Men took off, and I didn't even know Mad Men. You know, that was one of those things some people were watching, but a lot of people weren't. And it got like a lot of critical buzz. And also I was like, yeah, remember that guy from football? He's the lead on that show. But that's about as good of a late career success story as you're probably going to get. Cranston's is interesting because he was the Malcolm in the Middle dad, you know, and usually that's in Hollywood. You hit a part like that, and that usually just becomes what you're known for, you know, and then that's your career. And then you end up doing like Ray Romano, where you're in Parenthood in a recurring role, and you start some TNT show, but you never really hit that height.
But, you know, it's like everything else. It's chance. Like he's in an episode of the X-Files that Vince Gilligan wrote.
Yeah.
And that's why this all happened, obviously it only took that kind of one exposure to him for Vince Gilligan to go like, I think this guy could be perfect for this. Like, I'm not sure. It's a role where you almost, he also, to a degree, takes advantage of the pre-existing knowledge that he was in Malcolm in the Middle, because the first few episodes of Breaking Bad, you're supposed to see the show through his eyes and love him and see him as this guy who's doing something he doesn't want to do for his family because he has cancer. So it almost, so that the dissonance between those programs really, I think, probably worked to the benefit in a way that nobody was conscious of at the time, because I certainly did not know that the show was going to sort of unspool the way it did.
But it seems like he knew, but sometimes you get the feeling from these guys that they'll say after the fact that they knew this was going to happen and that was going to happen, but a lot of times they're talking out of their butt. And it does seem like this was always the plan from him from day one, that this was how Walter White's story was going to unfold over the years.
Yes.
I mean, maybe he didn't know all the beats, but he was going from point A to point B to point C to point D, and then point E was the, rock bottom, where he legitimately turns evil, I guess. Would you call him evil? I kind of feel like I would.
Evil's a complicated word. I mean, he's certainly acting evil. The fact that he's choosing to be evil, choosing to act the way that he does, might make that term relevant. I'm not a big fan of using the word evil, I guess.
All right, shameless plug coming. Would you say that he chose to wear the black hat?
That he did?
Yeah.
Or that I did?
No, that he did.
Oh, well, he literally does.
He literally wears the black hat.
Yes, yeah.
I can't remember. Did you write about this? Was this a chapter in your book or not? It wasn't.
Oh, I discussed basically the way that television after the middle 90s, in order to sort of feel real to people, had to change the way they portray drug dealers.
Yep.
And that while it's not possible for television to really glamorize drug use, they have decided that drug culture can be displayed positively. And that when you look at people on The Wire, or you look at people on Breaking Bad, or somebody on Weeds, that somebody who deals drugs is just seen as kind of like a complicated, sophisticated blue-collar employee.
I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that Tony Soprano, people always point to him as like the turning point. Couldn't you say Tony Montana was the turning point? Tony Montana was the ultimate bad guy, and that's one of the most enduring, popular 80s movies and iconic characters. And everybody loves Tony Montana, and every rapper on the planet has that Scarface poster in every Cribs episode. And I mean, I kind of feel like Tony Montana got shortchanged. You're not with me?
I don't know if I agree with that, because it's so like he is an attractive character, but it's to say you're a fan of Tony Soprano means that you don't see the world in black and white terms. To say you're a fan of Scarface and you aspire to be like Scarface means that you want to be a criminal.
Right, you're
you
a cartoon character.
You want to commit crime. You aspire to a criminal lifestyle. What is sort of the moral complexity of his character? Like, what's the most positive thing about his character besides his work ethic?
Well, the complexity is when he shoots Manny. Because that's like, it's one of those, oh, no, you can't shoot Manny. I mean, and you could drag that back to Godfather 2 with Michael Corleone killing Fredo. Spoiler alert, 39 years later. But Michael Corleone killing Fredo was the ultimate conflicted bad guy, right? People love Michael Corleone, but...
because, he stays within, he uses a different ethical framework, but he stays within it. Yep. And not only does he stay within it, he also stays within it with the complexity of the other ethical frameworks. Like, I can't kill him till our mom is dead.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that, when you see a bad person do something like that, that is the kind of thing that I think really makes them great in a way. When you see someone who, even when they're doing terrible things, has another framework that they have to concern themselves, which actually takes precedence.
I think Soprano, the most fascinating part, and it's discussed in both of those books, and people have made the point, but I really think this is the important point for that character. It was the casting of Gandolfini, because if you look at, like, we had other bad, quote unquote, bad people characters who you couldn't help but root for and who were complicated and who danced on both sides of good and evil. Like, that had been a movie character for forever. And the difference with what The Sopranos did was they cast somebody that just wasn't a typical lead of a show. Like, he didn't look like the lead of a show. In the old days, that would have been, I don't know, somebody a lot more handsome. And I guess like Dennis Franz on NYPD Blue is another example of this, where he became the lead of that show, and is somebody you just never would think would be the lead of a show, right? He's this fat, dumpy guy. And I think that's what The Sopranos changed, was that it changed the perception of who could lead a show.
Well, then also I think one of the brilliant moves was including the aspect of his seeing a psychiatrist, because then it put the character in a situation where he could be straightforwardly vulnerable, and that he kind of brings forth the idea that, oh yes, we're watching this gangster who we always know had an interesting kind of psychology, and now we're actually going to talk about that psychology in the open. Like, he sits down with Dr. Melfi and talks about how he feels about things. And it's very difficult for Tony Soprano to tell the truth, even to a psychiatrist, but it always comes out. And I think that was part of it, too. Speaking of bad guys, there was something I wanted to ask your opinion about. And it's kind of a touchy subject, but I really would be curious of what your response to this would be.
Is this... We just went on a super tangent. I still had more to go.
Oh, do you want to get back to The Sopranos?
Well, I wanted to hit Breaking Bad. Is this going to take us out of the Breaking Bad tangent? Well,
we can. It is. It's totally obvious. Totally disconnected to the other things we've been talking about.
All right. Can we do a couple more Breaking Bad things?
Okay.
Favorite episode?
My favorite episode of the series?
Single favorite.
I think it's the penultimate episode of one of the seasons that ends with a guy getting hit by a car. I can't remember if that season... I always get this confused.
Oh, and
3 or 2004.
It seems like Jesse's going to kill the guy, but then Bryan Cranston comes in, Walter White comes in and runs the guy over.
Yeah, and the episode with where they robbed the chemical from the train, that was a really good one. But those are the ones I remember. I guess if I had to, that's one show that I haven't in any way rewatched. I haven't seen many of the episodes more than once. So it's more like little moments from the show, I think.
What about the ATM? What about the ATM in the crack house? That was probably my favorite.
Yeah, that was many of the scenes involving Badger I find very likable. I find him to be a very great character.
It's funny because catching up with Breaking Bad so late, people always say, like, stay with it, just keep going. You'll get to, there'll be a couple points that you get to where you'll realize that you're going to keep going. One of them was when he's in the basement, which I think is like episode 4, season 1. And then with that drug dealer who's tied to the pole and that whole thing. And then the ATM one is just like, that to me was the first time the show reached its full potential of, you just didn't know what was going to happen next. I finally gave a shit about Jesse, who, for the first 7 episodes, I wasn't totally sure I felt about him. Was he just an unredeeming scumbag? Was there a human being in there? And then that was the episode where you're all in on Jesse after that one. I thought that was
you probably know this, but in the original Inception, Jesse was going to die like in the 4th episode. Yeah. Right. And it was just like, we just got to keep going with this. I think one episode a lot of people remember is the one called The Fly, that kind of that bottle episode where they're stuck. That's a really good one. But those are kind of that one and the train robbery ones. Those are almost kind of showy episodes to kind of show off almost like the cinematic ability of the people making the show.
Super creative.
Yes, and hard to do. Yeah. Hard to actually hard to do. Which I think when you're probably someone who makes television shows, and so much of it is static. It's people sitting in a room talking, or people, having an argument in a place. Like, you sort of want to show that you can do like something big and physical,
Right. I thought the best season was the whole Gus season that ended in Gus's death. I just thought that was one of the single best seasons of television I've ever seen in my life. And I know you don't care about Emmys, but Jesse ended up winning the Best Supporting Emmy over Gus that year, which is one of the all-time great battles. And I don't even care about the Emmys, but it's really hard for me to believe anybody was better than Gus in that season. I thought Gus was amazing. Giancarlo Esposito.
Yeah, they're, Gus is really great in the episode where they're in Mexico and he takes the poison and he makes himself vomit.
It's unbelievable. I think that was probably my single favorite episode. Where'd you stand on his face getting, or the explosion, and he comes out and the side of his face is missing? Because I know people who were against it that thought it was too sci-fi. I loved it.
I would say it was a little more cartoonish than I would have liked, but I wasn't in any. I didn't see it and I was like, oh, that ruins everything or whatever. It seemed a step outside of kind of the hard realism the show usually incorporates when it deals with violence. Like, right. when Gus kills that guy in the basement with a box cutter, like, that's a very realistic scene to me. That's what I assume it looks like when someone gets killed with a box cutter. That's not what I assume it looks like when someone gets blown up in an notebook. We're starting
this thing on Grantland for the next 8 episodes. Andy Greenwald's idea, one of the best ideas he's had. Precaps. Where you have the recaps on Mondays, but nobody ever does the precap. It's like the pregame show for the upcoming TV show. So we're going to start these on Grantland this week, where people make, predictions on what they think is going to happen, and just random whatevers. How do you feel about the future of the precap? Do you think Greenwald really invented something here?
Well, it seems like something that will be read by people who like to read about television.
Good. Then we win. Winner. Great title.
I sort of like, for example, I have an idea of how Breaking Bad is going to end.
Let's hear it.
But I don't even know if I want to say it, in the fear that either A, I will be right, or B, I will be wrong, and it will still in some way sort of impact people's experience with this show. But I guess I'll just say it, because if you want to hear it, you can just stop listening.
Wait a second. So you feel like the theory you're about to espouse could affect forever the way people watch these last 8 episodes?
Well, no. Here's why I say this, okay? Because a bunch of idiots screwed up the red wedding for me in Game of Thrones, and they didn't tell me what happened. All I know is that Sunday I went on Twitter, and all of these people were like, if you been watching Game of Thrones, this is going to blow your mind. You're just not going to be able to deal with this. So I actually imagined a much crazier scenario. I thought to myself, like the mother of dragons is going to become a dragon. Like, I thought, like, she's going to turn into a dragon, and then this is going to start this war from, the people on the ocean are going to attack the land as dragons, and she's going to be a dragon. So when it was just people getting murdered, I was like, no, that could happen, I guess. Like, I was not really impacted by it because I had been pre-warned to imagine something that I could never possibly comprehend. And the fact of the matter is, a bunch of characters dying seems like something that happens in that show.
I'm really glad you brought this up, because one of our Grantland editors, Dan Fearman, was one of the people who did those tweets, because this whole community of people who read the Game of Thrones books and then have to remind people of that. I'm really mad at all of these people. Congratulations, you read all the books. Like, really, let's throw a party for you, and we'll bake you a cake. Can I just watch the TV show now? But they did. They gave the heads up.
In a way, I feel bad for them. Because obviously there's going to be more to the books than there is to the TV show. So we can watch the TV shows, have this experience, and then if we still want to learn more, we can read the books and get sort of a deeper dive on all this. But if you go the other way, it's no fun. But if you read the book first and you know everything that's going to happen, of course the TV show is just going to seem sort of like a shallow sort of interpretation of the key points of these, 1,200-page books that you've been reading in your free time. So I think it's really I'm glad I haven't read them. I really think it's increasing my enjoyment of this program.
Yeah, I can't remember watching a TV show or a movie after having read the book about it and not have had that book experience taint whatever I was watching. And the most recent example was Moneyball, which for a variety of reasons I just couldn't handle. Moneyball was a really well done movie. Brad Pitt was excellent in it. For the story it was trying to tell, they did a really good job because it was a complicated story, and I didn't enjoy it. And it bothered me the whole time that they were steering away from all these different things and combining baseball facts. And the whole time I was mad.
I mean, I guess it kind of works, both ways, though, I suppose. When I was like a senior in high school, I decided I really was going to read Presumed Innocent by Scott Turow. I was very excited to read this book. Maybe I was a junior, whenever it came out in softcover. And then I started reading the book, and I'm like 12 pages in. And there's a commercial, or maybe I saw the trailer for Presumed Innocent, the movie. So now for the rest of the book, as I'm reading it, I'm hearing Harrison Ford say everything in the book. So I never got a chance to kind of create who the lead character would be.
That's
I suppose the people who read the Game of Thrones books, I wonder what the experience is like when they see, Jon Snow. Does he look the way they imagined him? Does Khaleesi look the way they imagined her? I don't know. Maybe that can they even remember what they imagined beforehand? I wonder.
Where does Game of Thrones rank for you? Is it on the short list for you?
It's a different kind of thing than the canonical shows. I feel like it is that Game of Thrones is the best show of the second tier of programming, where the show is mainly good because of the story. And it's just sort of like there's an escapist quality to it. It's just, it's fun, but it's not transcendent the way Breaking Bad and Mad Men and The Wire and Sopranos are. Like it's not, I never see anything in Game of Thrones that makes me think differently about my life. And sometimes something will happen in Mad Men, and I'll go to bed that night, and I'll be thinking about this show, and then I'll be thinking about my life. And I'll start thinking about, I'll put myself in those positions or take the positions from the show and put them into my life, and it will make me think differently about the world. Game of Thrones makes me think about the Game of Thrones world. And when the show is over, it's over for me. And I love it. I love it. A really good episode of Game of Thrones, especially the stuff involving the Lannisters. I just think that Cersei's such a great actress, and Peter Dinklage is so good, and the acting in those scenes is really great, and I really appreciate it. But it seems disconnected from any reality I've experienced, because that's the idea. It's fantasy.
I feel the same about Game of Thrones as I do about watching the Red Sox. I've hit this point in baseball where I just like watching the Red Sox. I don't watch any of the other teams. I just watch my team. Even this year, I took a year off from all the advanced stats and FIP and XFIP and all that stuff. And I was just like, I'm just going to watch the games. And I like Shane Victorino. I don't care if maybe the advanced stats aren't his friend sometimes. I like his at-bats. I like the chemistry he brings to the team and his personality, and I'm just glad he's on the team. Is that okay? Can I just have that opinion? And I feel the same way about Game of Thrones, where it's like, you know what? There's 50 characters on every episode. I could either go all in and use every brain cell in my head and try to figure out what's going on and just throw myself 1,000% into this, or I could just sit here and enjoy it and watch it, and then when it's over, not think about it again. And that's where I'm at with Game of Thrones.
To me, this is a real credit to the writing of that show. In the middle of any given episode, I never know what's happening. But by the end of the episode,
who's that guy?
But by the end of the episode, I feel like I mostly do. Like, that show is good in that you don't need every detail to understand, like a macro understanding of what's happening. And in fact, if you have like a I almost think that if you really understand every detail of all the plot machinations, you're actually probably not seeing the forest for the trees. Like, the show might be less good if you fully understand it, because it's sort. I mean, I like those moments where I'm trying to figure out, like, now, is he a good guy? And then I think to myself, well, who are the good guys in this? Who am I really rooting for? Because the way the show opens, it makes it seem like you're supposed to root for one family, okay? And yet, as the show happens, like, I am much more interested in the Lannister clan, and I, in fact, want them to succeed. And I realize that they do a lot of terrible things, but, that they are, so now I'm trying to even figure out, was I always supposed to root for them? I don't know. I can't tell,
Who doesn't root for the Lannisters? Are there people out there that aren't rooting for the Lannisters?
I guess
people are rooting for the little boy, the boy who can't walk, who got pushed out of the tower.
He's still supposed to be he's clearly going to become the hero of this story, right? Like, that's what's going to happen. That's what I think. That he and the little girl are going to essentially become. Although, who's to say? Aren't these books still being written? They are. Yeah. So, maybe even the guy writing them is not exactly sure who the heroes are. I don't know. Although he's not very interested in that. I think that I've seen interviews with him where he basically has said that, questions of morality, he does not like to be fixed. And his main point is that life is not fair. That's what we're supposed to take away from the show.
Life is not fair. Interesting. I like watching with my wife because anytime an animal gets harmed in any movie or TV show, she gets irrationally upset. And when the wolf died spoiler alert, when the wolf dies in Game of Thrones, she was so upset about that, but the Red Wedding didn't flinch. Didn't flinch as multiple throat slittings. Was totally fine with that. The wolf was a deal breaker for her, though. What was that's
a strangely common thing. You see that a lot. That I remember. I think it's in the movie Twister. In the first scene of the movie Twister, a little girl who then becomes the heroine, she sees her father and a dog, I think, sucked out of a bomb shelter, a tornado shelter.
Yeah.
And unless I'm misremembering it, though, the dog being sucked into the tornado is much more meaningful than her father in some weird way.
No, I don't think you're misremembering that. Hey, you brought up the shows that make you sit in bed and think about your life. This would be an interesting list. What is the show that you're most embarrassed made you sit in bed and think about your life? Was it an episode of Night Court in 1987? Party of Five?
Boy.
I bet Party of Five made you sit there and think about stuff once or twice.
Yeah, I never saw an episode of Party of Five.
Oh, you missed out.
There are some shows I totally missed. I just
you definitely missed on that one.
Yeah. Boy, when would I be embarrassed to say? Well, I mean,
I guess maybe embarrassed is the wrong word, but more slightly perplexed that the show hit you like that.
Because there's I always thought The Wonder Years was an interesting show because it was a show that you could watch as a 10th grader and be nostalgic for 6th grade. That was a really brilliant move. It was like a show for very young people to feel nostalgic about their past life. I feel like that show, I often, when I was younger, would see an episode and I would really, I would think about for a long time. Although those shows are on the Hub now, and when I watch them now, they seem like, I don't know, like they were written by literally like a 10th grader and written left-handed or something. It's like
they've not aged well. I actually thought that was really interesting in Brett Martin's book. He talked about how David Chase almost ended up writing for The Wonder Years, and he tried to push it into a direction where Kevin was going to kind of go off the wagon a little bit and start smoking pot, and they realized it was probably not a great fit.
Didn't he write one super dark episode? Didn't David Chase write one super dark? Yeah.
I think he did, and I can't remember if they used it or not, but I just thought that was funny, that thought of David Chase writing any episodes of The Wonder Years. That just doesn't seem like a great match. You would have liked Party of Five. I'm disappointed you didn't watch that one.
Oh, I tend to like shows like that. I just didn't see it. I mean, that's, and that it also happened during an era when if you didn't see something, it wasn't a big deal. Like, you didn't say to yourself, like, oh, everyone's watching a Party 5, so maybe I'm going to sit home tonight and catch up on all these episodes. For one, you couldn't have done that. It would have been impossible. And second of all, there was the whole concept of, like, appointment television did not exist.
And you made the key point, though. If you missed the boat, there was no way to go back.
Yeah.
In 1996, if you missed season 1, that was it. You were out, or you could just jump in and try to patch together what might have happened. But, it was interesting. I thought about this summer. There really wasn't a definitive Sunday night show once Mad Men went away, which I think Mad Men and Game of Thrones both went away right after the NBA Finals, like a couple weeks after. And there's probably like the last 5-6 weeks, there really hasn't been anything, but almost like mentally, the habit is on Sunday night, there's going to be a good TV show to sink your teeth into, right? But then for these last 5-6 weeks, there hasn't been anything. So, me, like probably a lot of people in America, have been trying to talk myself into Ray Donovan. And it's just not biting, and it's not nearly as good as these other shows, but it's just out of habit because I need that show. So the thing we've been doing is we actually have saved The Bridge, and we watch The Bridge on Sundays to kind of get that Sunday night fix, to keep that feeling.
The Bridge is okay. Have you watched Orange is the New Black?
Watched the first one. Super weird. My wife fell asleep like 17 or 18 times. And I should probably keep going on that one, right?
It's good. It's very good. I think it could be argued, as with many of these shows that are very sophisticated, first episode is the worst one. Like
that's good to know.
Because there's a lot of shows like, in fact, I kind of thought the first episode of The Bridge wasn't that great, and it gets a little better after that. If you're this is something that is like a new problem. This idea that because of the shows we were talking about earlier, The Sopranos and The Wire and Breaking Bad and all that, we now agree that television can be as transcendent as film. That you can watch a television show and the experience can be richer and greater and more meaningful and more complex than a movie. So now people are consciously trying to make shows that are transcendent, which is, and the reason The Sopranos and that stuff was so good is because they were slow, and that the creative process of these personas happened over time, and you kind of got to know people in one context and you got to know them in another one. So with like The Americans, for example, it seemed like that happened too fast to me. Like there was too much happening in the first 2 episodes. And I think that Orange is the New Black is being a little more of the old model. That like the things that are interesting about it happen slowly.
Where do you stand on the Netflix strategy of just making all the episodes available at once? I personally despise it. I think it's a terrible idea.
I love it. Why don't you
love it? Of course. Of course we're going to disagree on that. Couldn't they have split the difference and just released 3 a week?
Why is it better to have a limited amount when I can have all of them? So I can watch them once every week, or I can watch them all at once if that's what I want.
Because in the recap culture that we live in now, I think it's too, and also like just the word of mouth culture and just experiencing shows with other people, and whether you're doing it on Twitter or with your friends or on Facebook or whatever the hell you're doing, hasn't that become part of watching TV? Netflix is trying to bypass that whole experience, which I don't totally agree with.
Yeah, well, I'm not the culture you're talking about. I don't.
You don't
think
like that culture.
No, I don't. I mean, I love talking about television, but the idea that somehow it needs to be a collective experience. I don't know. I mean, I wonder if it's because, like, okay, I think thus far, Orange is the New Black, I haven't seen the whole season, seems to be the best of the ones of the Netflix shows. It's better than the Kevin Spacey show. It's, but now it's still not in the class of these other programs we talked about. Maybe if there was ever a show that good, I would be like, oh boy, it'd be interesting to sort of share this with other people. For the most part, I'm not really into that. Like, I don't read recaps. I won't, it has nothing to do, I'm not interested in that. If I've watched the show, I have my ideas about it. If I haven't watched the show, I don't need to read someone else's perception of a show I haven't experienced. So I'm not really part of that.
All right, I'm going to try something incredible right now. I'm going to both agree and disagree with you. I agree. I don't read. I am not a recap culture guy either. I don't care about that stuff. But here's where I disagree. I think it's a competitive disadvantage to put yourself in a position to not take advantage of all that stuff and to try to appeal to that demographic. You're basically cutting off part of the demographic that can help your show become more seen and more popular.
Well, okay, but aren't you essentially then doing, as an audience member, what we always complained about TV executives doing in the past? And that looking at these shows totally as commodities? Like, I listened to the podcast you did with Andy where you were talking about Game of Thrones, and you were sort of like, I don't even care about this character. It's not adding anything. They should just remove it. And to me, that seemed a lot like what we would have complained about TV executives doing in the past. Seeing a show, seeing it's too complicated, and saying, just focus this on Ross and Rachel. Don't go anywhere else with that. Like, why are you interested in the competitive nature of how successful these shows are? Like what stake do you have in that?
First of all, I like what you tried to do here. I like how you tried to make this a little more competitive. I think my point is the whole goal of these shows is to get renewed, right? Like, I doubt that the guy who did, what's that show called? Orange is the New Black?
New Black.
Yeah, I doubt they were going into this going, we're going to do 10 really good episodes, and if we don't get picked up, that's fine. Like, I think part of it is self-preservation. You're going to try to come up with ways to take advantage of all the different ways that could help you succeed and stay on the air for a few years so you could execute your vision. And my whole thing is, with Netflix, the way they decided to do it is a way that only appeals to some people. I think they could have had the best of both worlds. Like, they could have put out 3 a week, and within 4 weeks, all of them would have been available. But then at the very least, now you're appealing to that internet culture who drive interest toward your show, which helps your show. You're against that.
Well, I mean, I don't know why. I don't see what I'm against here, because the experience you just described, you could have that. That's available when they're all there. But I'm not sure why you are interested in the sort of universal success of these shows. I mean, I guess you could make the argument, if I like a show, I want to stay on the air, so they should do whatever they can in order to sort of maximize the exposure and the interest. But I don't think about these things when I watch these programs.
I was annoyed by what happened with House of Cards, and it just seemed like people. I like being able to talk about shows with people. I think that's part of the fun about watching a show is like, are you watching that show? Oh my God, hey, what'd you think? I mean, what else are we going to talk about? When you're talking with your friends, like, that's one of the things you talk about. And it was annoying to me that just about everybody I talked to hadn't started watching House of Cards yet, or they were, I don't have time to watch the 13 yet. And it seemed like nobody was on the same time frame as I was. Like, Mark Lasanti was the only one I knew who had already watched all of them, who was in the office. And so I was just talking to him about, what'd you think of this? How about when this happened? I don't know. I feel like that's part of TV. I like talking about this stuff with people. You can't tell me that you don't like talking about this stuff with people.
Well, I do. I don't. I guess it doesn't seem like I'm more interested. Maybe I'll say it like this. I'm more interested in the show than the conversation. So if I really like the show, I prefer having control over when I consume it, as opposed to the idea that other people are consuming it with me. Well, so what is your general stance on spoilers in general?
It's a tough one. My feeling is, like, you can't get mad for spoiling The Wire, right, at this point?
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think at this point anybody can get mad about any Breaking Bad spoilers. You've had plenty of time. It's on Netflix. I think now more than ever, it's so easy to catch up that we should be allowed to just talk about Breaking Bad and reference it. I think when you're talking about, like, Wednesday night's Bridge and just dropping stuff from it on Twitter or wherever, then that gets a little dicey. But I think
we'll use the Red Wedding as an example. At what point do you feel it is safe for someone to tweet a joke that gives away what happened in the Red Wedding?
Safe in a way that people won't get pissed off about it?
No, I mean, what you think is reasonable. Like, the show happens Sunday, okay? Obviously, nobody should be tweeting anything about it Sunday night. Nobody should be doing anything about it on Monday. In fact, I once made a joke about Mad Men on a Monday, and I suddenly realized how selfish that was, as if somehow my tweet was more important than someone's experience with that show. But let's say the Red Wedding happened. It's a pretty big deal, okay? It's not like a normal episode. It's like a big deal. When can people start sort of having a conversation about that in a way that like a uninvolved third party could find out about it?
So shouldn't it be maybe 72 hours? Do you think Obama should weigh in with an official hour? After 72 hours, it's fair game?
I mean, 72 hours might be pretty good for a TV show. What about a major plot point in a movie? Like, let's say The Empire Strikes Back was new.
Well, you said Usual Suspects.
Usual Suspects. Okay, let's say The Usual Suspects came out this Friday. You saw it on Friday. At what point would it be okay to make a joke about what happened or to make a reference to what happened in one of your columns about the NBA, where some totally unexpected person could be reading about Jamal Crawford and all of a sudden they find out who Kaiser Soze is? How many days, how much time needs to pass between the debut of the movie and when that joke can be made?
I've written about this before, but I spoiled The Usual Suspects for my friend Jacko. And for this very reason, it was like a few weeks after it came out, and it just made me mad that he hadn't seen it yet. So I spoiled it for him, and we got in a big fight. But I would say for a movie, it should be like at least a month. Don't you think?
Okay. Well, I mean, it kind of depends on how big the movie is. Because
it's interesting. The Crying Game. Remember, everybody's like, "Oh, there's a secret in the Crying Game."
Yes.
And everybody kept the secret. Nowadays, the internet would have ruined that secret before the movie came out. That would have been it.
Well, although it wasn't kept perfectly, because I saw the Crying Game on video, and I don't know how, but I knew it was going to happen.
I saw it in the theater. I saw it in the theater and did not know it was going to happen, and it was pretty discombobulating.
I bet it was.
Yeah, especially on a 50-foot screen. It's like, whoa! It's
and
like one of those moments.
I'm certain the impact of that reveal was greater than the sum total of everything you have read or heard about the Crying Game before. Well, the actual moment it happened affected you more than what any parody of it, any joke of it.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to weigh this, like the merits of something, because you can't really do criticism if you're not going to talk about key plot points. So at what point can someone write about I'm trying to think of something that's even more contemporary.
Well, the Red Wedding's the best example, because that became like a real phenomenon that week, and there were a million jokes, and it was clear that something happened, and it's called the Red Wedding. I mean, you don't need to be a rocket science to figure that one out. So if you didn't see that in 24 hours, you're screwed.
I mean, I think the episode is called The Red Wedding. When I started watching it, I didn't think a bunch of people were going to die at it. I mean, it seems obvious now when you think about it, in the past, but at the time I didn't know that.
Sure, but if you went on Twitter at all, though, you would have seen all the Red Wedding stuff, and you would have put two and two together. The worst spoil I've ever had in my life, I'm going back 30 years, during the early days of HBO when they only had so many movies to show, and just randomly flipping channels and caught the last 90 seconds of Eddie and the Cruisers. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. Eddie and the Cruisers. Did you ever see that movie?
Oh, I'm sure I did at some point, yeah.
So at the end, it's revealed that Eddie has been alive all along. You're watching this montage that somebody's made of them that appreciates them. The screen goes black, and there's Eddie all these years later with a beard staring at the camera, just really proud, and he walks off, and that's the end of the movie. So I actually saw that just the 90 seconds. And then subsequently that became one of my favorite 80s movies, but I've always felt angry that I had just randomly seen that and that had been spoiled, because that would have been such an unbelievable moment if you didn't know it was coming. Now, granted, I'm talking about a Michael Pare movie from 30 years ago, but still.
In the very first week of Grantland, I think I wrote about this, sort of like, if someone were to attempt to make this Sixth Sense now, like
you did write about this.
Yeah, there would be such an inherent risk in that. Because the success of it is, so, I was just starting as a movie critic at the Beacon Journal when that movie came out, so I saw like an early screening. All I knew about it that was like essentially Bruce Willis is in this movie. And during the whole film, I thought it was pretty good, and then of course at the end, it suddenly seems great. At least at the time, it just seemed great when that happened. And I wonder how I reviewed it. I wonder how I avoided explaining this. I mean, I must have. But I don't know if that would, like, somebody would break the embargo now. There's just no,
there's no way.
There's just like, it's like you want to democratize anything. I mean, that's the risk. If you democratize things, you're then giving like absolute idiots the same sort of mechanism to sort of, to work with this as in the past, only, people who sort of were more conscious of what the ramifications would be.
Well, I would argue, you gain some stuff and you lose some stuff. So the current culture, maybe you can't have a Sixth Sense every couple of years, but on the other hand, you gain all these other things. Wait, we've set this up perfectly now. We're coming to the end of this podcast because I actually have to go. So you're not going to get to ask me your touchy question. It'll have to be the next time. But
okay,
you were going to say you had some sort of prediction for this final season, and then you worried about making the prediction because you didn't want to hurt the last season of the Breaking Bad for people. So now we're giving people the choice. You can end this podcast right now, and you'll never know what Chuck's prediction was, or you can keep listening, but you can't get mad at us if he ruined the rest of the season with whatever he's about to say. So take the floor.
Okay, there's a scene, I'm pretty sure it was in this previous season. It may have even been 2 seasons ago, but I'm pretty sure it was in the last season, where Walter White goes to see Saul. And he's looking for something. And I can't even remember exactly what he's looking for. You've watched it more recently, you may remember. And at one point, Saul thinks that everything has collapsed. So he's like, look, there's this thing we can do. It'll cost a lot of money, but I can make you disappear. Like, you will be gone, and you can't contact your family. You can't contact everything. But, there's no going back if you do this. And then Walter White is like, that's not what I'm here for. He was like looking for money or looking for a gun or something. There was some, but there's no way that Vince Gilligan includes that dialogue if it's not going to happen. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think that everything is going to collapse, and Walter White is going to go to Saul, and he's going to say, like, I need to disappear for real. And he's going to disappear, and then he's going to come back, because the ultimate thing will be that you cannot actually walk away from your moral choices.
Oh, I'd like how you close that. You left out something that helps your case. At the beginning of this last half season, it starts out, remember, like somewhere in the future, and he's at some diner. Yeah. And wouldn't that foreshadow what you're predicting?
Yes. That's part. I mean, I think it was, it's not, that's part of the reason I'm making this prediction, because he seems to be, if I recall, he's got a fake ID that says he's in Vermont or something.
He's got hair. He's not bald anymore.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
And
I think you're right.
Part of it. But here's I don't think, like, it'll be, because this is the big thing about this show, and this will probably dictate maybe how it ends up being perceived historically as like the greatest show or among the greatest show or disappointment. On the one hand, we place too much emphasis on ending the TV show now. I think that's a mistake, but that's just how it is. So if he does do this, if I'm right about this, and he disappears, and for whatever reason, they just say, like, that's how it's ending. He's gone. He gets away with it. Nobody else does. What that will say about the show will be very profound. Whereas if he comes back, if he disappears and decides, I can't do that, I need to go back and I need to sort of, deal with the choices I have made, that sort of profound in a different way that's closer to traditional television, but in some ways would be a slightly less meaningful.
So
because
you feel like
if this show really ends with a totally nihilistic view of life, the fact that being the villain, being the worst person is just one of many choices you can make, and the way to succeed, there will be no show that's ever done that.
So in a way, this show is like the Miami Heat heading into the 2013 playoffs. Has a chance to be one of the all-time teams, but there's also a chance that it could screw it up a little bit here, and maybe play 2 straight 7-game series and fall down by 5 in Game 6, 28 seconds left before miraculously pulling out the title. But still, you don't feel like they're one of the all-time greats after you watch it.
I suppose that is one potential metaphor. Yes.
I knew that would bother you. I actually think he's going to die.
That could happen. That's my wife. She's the TV critic for Entertainment Weekly. She believes that will happen. I think that what she is hoping will happen is that Jesse will kill Lopes. And that would also be, I think, a very interesting sort of turn to the story. But
I think you can have both. I think whatever you just described is going to happen, probably in some form, but he'll ultimately come back because he'll have some sort of unfinished business. Which brings back to your point.
I guess I'm hoping that they kind of go all the way. I mean, even though it's a weird thing to be rooting for, you know. I mean, because the whole thing with the show is that obviously as he's transformed into this different person, it's always sort of asking the person watching the show, at what point do you jump off this train? At one point do you stop sort of watching and experiencing the show through the main character, even though that's how television has always told us we experience TV. That, you know, that the main character is the center of the show, and it's like, you know, it's clearly now, and when you watch, you know, it's clear. It's like he is no longer like they're like. It would be hard to make an argument for what his most positive quality is at this point, besides being good at his job.
I can't wait to find out what happens. I do feel, last point, and then we really have to go. Would you be okay if showrunners just never gave interviews? Yeah,
I would be okay with it. I mean, that's what P.T. Anderson basically does. I mean, P.T. Anderson's a movie maker who gives interviews about as often as Stanley Kubrick did. I don't think it hurts his movies at all. I think it helps them.
I wouldn't say anything to anybody. I actually really appreciated how David Chase handled The Sopranos right after it ended. And then he since then he's given like 50 interviews. But it almost feels like you created this show. Like, why do interviews about it after the fact? Just let people take away from it what they're going to take away from it. Don't shape that direction. And, well, here's what I was thinking with this. And, well, here's the important part of the arc. And this is going to be the most explosive. Like, I would rather they didn't say anything. I know that's unrealistic, but I'm waiting for the one showrunner who just doesn't play that game. And just like, look, I'm not saying anything. You guys figure it out. And I would
David Lynch was kind of like that about Twin Peaks.
True, because he had no f***ing idea what was happening in that show, so he couldn't talk about it. Chuck Klosterman, your book, I Wear the Black Hat? That's what the title is, right? Yes,
I although you kind of add a question mark at the end of it. That would have been a better title, maybe.
I Wear the Black Hat? But that's been out, doing very well. Good book. I recommend it. I enjoyed it. What was the chapter I couldn't believe you didn't have in there? I emailed you.
I think you wanted something about pro wrestling.
Oh yeah, the Andy Kaufman pro wrestling heel era.
Oh yeah,
Andy Kaufman really like proactively wanted to wear the black hat. Yeah, maybe for the paperback epilogue, you could throw that in. Chuck Klosterman, thank you for your time. Talk to you soon.
So I get to sign off. Whoa.
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Podcenter at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.